People ask me all the time, what was your favorite NCAA team? And I said, my first, which was at Rhode Island. I was an overnight success in my 17th year as a head coach. So, I was a success because my players were such a success. They were such a together team. We had leaders everywhere on this team, not just that started, but on our bench. Players like Jimmy Christian, who went on to have a great career as a head college coach. Josh Oppenheimer, who's working in the NBA as an assistant coach and has for years. We had 10 of those players go on to become head or assistant coaches collegiately or in college. I never had a team like that before or after, where so many players went into coaching. So that was, it has to be my favorite team and maybe my best team. I don't know. 1987-88 was a great year for college basketball. The NBA talks about it all the time, that you can't win anything without a big three, but to have Silk Owens, Tommy Garrick, and Kenny Green, three of the greatest players that ever played at the University of Rhode Island.
You and Owens, like I said, arguably the best backcourt. What was it like playing with him, and how did you guys play off one another? Two obviously exceptional guards.
Silk was phenomenal. The backstory to that, to mine and Carlton's friendship, was he didn't qualify for school right away as a freshman, as a high school senior. So he had to matriculate the summer before our freshman year. He couldn't live on campus because he wasn't a qualifier. So Coach Malone asked my mom and dad if Carlton could stay with us for the summer. So you have two kids thrown together who had never really even met each other. He showed up at my doorstep one day and we became pretty fast friends, basketball wise and off the court. But in that summer, I learned how far behind I was actually coming out of high school, because when Carlton came to live with us, we'd go to play basketball every day. It's how we came to know each other. It's how we built our friendship. It was through basketball. And I'd take him to the park or the gym to play with my high school teammates, is what we did every day. And he was unbelievable. He was so much better than all of us that every day my friends would just look at me. They'd be like, that's who you have to play against and with in college? Like, good luck.
Yeah.
Like, he was 6 foot, maybe 150, 60 pounds coming out of high school. And he was dunking on people in this. I had never seen a kid do that.
Yeah.
So it upped my level of preparation. Like, I knew how far I was behind. So I worked really hard to be competitive with Carlton that summer. And he accepted that. He accepted me for it. He never shied at me for it. He never looked down at me for not being able to handle the ball as well as he did or shoot the ball as well. We were just buddies.
Yeah.
And by the time we got to school, he was a starter. That was entrenched. He was going to start. And I had to fight for playing time, and that was okay.
Mm-hmm.
And I fought. And that comes from my mom and dad, the level of belief I had in myself and the hard work, my ethic. And that came from my mom and dad. But Carlton showed me what I was in for and how I had to raise my level. So I'll always be indebted to him for that. So he's probably the best player I've ever played against. I've played with and against in college, no doubt.
Yeah.
But yeah, he showed me the way.
And let me say this before I even move forward. Tommy was the hardest playing teammate I ever played with throughout my career.
Yeah.
And I played with a lot of guys.
Penny as a person, do you have any, maybe stories or just things that kind of made him who he was, as a player and a person?
Yeah, it's interesting you asked, because again, I was young. I was 23 years old, maybe something like that. And again, I'm covering college basketball for the first year. It's URI and it's Kenny Green. This next year, I start covering Providence, and it was Eric Murdoch senior year. And I look back over 30 years of covering college basketball in Rhode Island. Those two are probably in the top 5 players I was fortunate enough to cover. I think Kenny was that good, that talented. Eric Murdoch was an All-American who played in the NBA for 7 years, obviously a very good player. But No, Kenny, I think that toughness, I appreciated how difficult it was for him to play.
Kenny Green always came off the bench because of his arthritic knees. It wasn't well publicized, but Kenny never practiced a full practice during my 2 years. He would go in the pool, he would run in the water, which was for him a little over the waist area. He used to work in the pool and then come in for the last 45 minutes of practice when I had half court and full court scrimmaging. And then he had to go ice his knees, both of them. It was a very, very tough time for Kenny and his development, but he was a great player. And
I got to show some love for the rest of the other players too.
Yeah.
Well, Bonzi Colson, I score a lot of points because Bonzi Colson setting screens for me. He was our center, right? He did the dirty work for us.
Yeah.
Mervin Cena, who I said I knew from New York, Brooklyn, New York, transfer from Seton Hall. Good player, good rebounder, hit the open shot. And then we got John Evans, who's very, very athletic kid. Great on the defensive end, can finish in transition. So we had a good unit. We only played 6 players.
And we talked about Garib, talked about Silk, talked about Green. Obviously, those are kind of the big three that are oftentimes, remembered. But if you go back, you look at the stats, you talk to the guys, one guy in particular, Mergen Cena, a transfer coming in. What went into your decision to leave Seton Hall and join Penders and URI?
Well, initially, people don't know this. I mean, Tom wasn't the one who recruited me. It was actually Brendan Malone. So Brendan was on his way out, but obviously at the time didn't know that. When I called Brendan, he was still the official coach at URI, and he recruited me heavily out of high school. So when I decided to leave Seton Hall, I thought it'd be a great opportunity to go play for Coach Malone. But obviously that didn't work out because Coach Malone took the job with the Knicks, and then Coach Penders came in, and I just decided to stay and play for Coach Penders.
Yeah. Was that difficult, in terms of making that decision, or was Coach Penn, when you got on the phone with Coach Penders or however you met him first, were you pretty, committed and saying, okay, this still is the best place for me? I mean, obviously it was, you went there, but.
Well, I mentioned this in another interview. Coach Penders wasn't a big fan of mine initially. So, and I, so when I committed to go to Rhode Island, and once Brendan decided he wanted to take the Knicks job, I wasn't sure if I still wanted to go, and he asked around, and one of the places he called was Fordham, and Coach Penders was the coach at Fordham at the time, and pretty much asked him, hey, I got Mergen Cena here. He still hasn't officially, gotten into school, but he's looking maybe to do something else since I'm leaving, and would Fordham be an option? And Penders said, no, I don't like him. But then Penders got the job, and it ended up working out for me. And I just decided, you know what, I'm going to prove to Coach Penders that I could play. And it ended up being a great fit.
But he was a great player. Can you talk a little bit about kind of Mergen's role?
Right. When I thought about this interview in advance, like I had mentioned, I was like, I got to talk about Mergen Cena because he was underrated at the time. He was one of those glue guys that could come in and do whatever they needed to him to do. Right. Everybody else had their roles pretty much. It was established what their roles were. And he was the guy who could come in if somebody was in trouble. Okay, I'm going to plug in at this slot. Anywhere from power forward to shooting guard, he could plug in at. And that's what I remember about him is a hard-nosed player, a team player, and a person that you absolutely need coming off the bench, depending on what those particular circumstances have to be for that game. And you're coming in with someone who could be a starter, but he ought to come into every game he came into, depending who he's filling in for. If somebody was injured, maybe, if Kenny's knees weren't great, he might have to play a different position more. So, if somebody got in foul trouble, he was the one who could come in and adapt. And he was a basketball player. He wasn't a this position, a this position, a this position. He was a basketball player. And for a lot of players, they come in and want to do what they do. Mergen would come into the game and do what needed to be done.
So I wanted to talk about kind of that transition from Brandon Malone to Coach Penders. You know, he had already kind of had this reputation as a Mr. Fix-It type guy, type coach.
Rhode Island leading George Washington on Martin Luther King Day, 49-27 with our live Monday afternoon matinee. Welcome back at halftime. I'm Bob Lee. Rhode Island looking to win its 7th game in a row. In the Atlantic 10, certainly this year, Temple, now the number 3 team in the country, getting a lot of the print and also the ink. But URI is making an impact. Head coach Tom Penders' second season, and everywhere he's gone, he has made a difference. Tom Penders, college basketball, Mr. Fix-It. He's turned around a number of programs, first at Tufts, then at Columbia, then Fordham. Penders turned disappointment into respectability. He left Fordham's Rams to work on Rhode Island's Rams.
He had success, you know, previously. But what was that like? How much notoriety just in Rhode Island? Because obviously we had Rick Pitino at PC. Most of the attention was there. But what was that transition like going from Coach Malone to Coach Penders?
Well, again, very little notoriety at the time because Providence College went to the Final Four in '87. That's what, you know, they were all about. They, you know, struggled a little bit until Tommy Garrick, you know, showed up and became the Tommy Garrick that we know in his junior year. So to me, it was an ideal transition. Not only that, with the staff that was able to come in at the same time too. Brendan was a very good recruiter. Obviously, he was Jim Boeheim's, one of his top assistants at Syracuse. So he helped to bring in the foundation of that team, just like Al Skinner brought in the foundation of the 98 team. So he brought those players there. And Tom Penders, with his easygoing, relatable style to the players, was the perfect transition, you know, having a great staff on there, too, with Al Skinner, who obviously, you know, played in the NBA, and Tim O'Shea.
Was that a smooth transition? Because obviously you're being recruited, you know, by one guy, even though, you know, you're redshirted, but you're in that program. Was that, you know, in terms of his style, was it similar? You know, obviously buy-in right away.
Complete opposites. Coach Malone was a slow it down. Let's take care of the basketball. We're going to grind it out. Whereas Coach Penders was like, here's the ball, go play. Yeah.
Well, you talked about it. So you were recruited by Malone. Obviously, was that 2 years with him, and then Penders came in
before Tom Penders came along? Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. And what was that transition for? You know, with Penders coming in, what shifted, if anything? I know I was talking to Kenny Green. He said the styles were a little different, more of a running gun with Penders. But what was that transition with a new coach?
Styles were completely different. Coach Malone was more of a regimented guy. Mm-hmm. He had been at Syracuse, and they always had some of the top players in the country, and he was used to winning. And we weren't ready to win yet. But I think he doesn't get enough credit for preparing us for the 2 years we had with Coach Penders. We went through some tough times in those first 2 years. I think we won maybe 15 games in total in 2 years. But in my sophomore year, we lost maybe 6 to 7 overtime games. So we were right there. We were on the cusp of being competitive and being good. And I think Brendan Malone made us mentally tough because it was tough. It was tough in those first 2 years, but he made us mentally tough. And I think that prepared us for when Coach Penders came in, and he basically just said, the best kids are going to play. Mm-hmm. I don't really know you guys that well. I'm just coming in, and it was like a week before the season, I think he got hired. He goes, the people who work hardest, the people I can trust the most are the people who are going to play. And he kind of, like Kenny said, he opened it up for us. I mean, at that point, I think we were mature enough to adapt to any style. But that running Rams kind of style that he incorporated suited us. You had Silk Owens, who could play on any level at any time from his freshman year all the way through his senior year. You had Kenny Green, who was one of the best big men in the country, it turned out to be. We didn't know it. Yeah. Outside of our bubble. Inside of our bubble, we did. But outside of URI, he was one of the best big men in the country. You had Bonzi Colson, who was like the epitome of a role-playing center, 6'9" guy who could step out and shoot a 15-footer, but who was more of an enforcer and a defender. You had John Evans, who was this athletic 3 who could get up and down the floor, play above the rim, rebound, set screens. He was really a smart, high IQ basketball kid. Cena, who transferred in from Seton Hall 6'7" shooter, a big three. I mean, we had a complete unit, and we had been forged through fire after losing for 2 years. We were ready to win, and it was the right man for the job when Coach Penders came and took over and led us to those 2 really, really good years, my final 2 years there.
What was that transition going from Malone to Penders for you as a basketball player and even personally?
Well, for me, when Coach Malone first decided to leave and go to the Knicks, I was kind of down.
Yeah.
Because I knew him on a personal level. Pretty much none of the other players really knew him like I did. So it was like a father figure leaving.
Mm-hmm.
Here at the University of Rhode Island. So it was kind of tough for me at first, but I'm from New York. I can make adjustments to any situation. So when Coach Penders came in, he was so positive and encouraging, and so it was a smooth transition, not only for myself but for Tommy as well.
Mm-hmm. So
that's when Tommy started to shine. We opened things up. It was a different style of play.
Well, the thing that probably was most important, probably one of the things that Tom did that was tremendously important, was he was able to invoke some confidence in those guys. Not just those 3 that you mentioned, but to all the players that participated. Mm-hmm. I think that was his biggest contribution, was invoking and giving them confidence that they can compete against anyone. I think Carlton probably came in with that attitude because he came out of New York and he played against a lot of great players, and he was an outstanding player himself. But Tommy his background was a little bit different, as was Kenny Green's background was a little bit different. Bonzi came from a background where he had played against a lot of great players coming out of D.C. Mergen, the same thing, coming out of Jersey. So I think that John Evans had played on a very fine high school team. So they had played against good competition, but I'm not sure if they felt the confidence to be as good a basketball team as they was. And that's that's what Tom Penders did for them. I thought that was his most important contribution to that team. And then, they all got along. It was just a really good fit. Guys had different roles, and they fulfilled those roles, and they embraced them. Tom constantly encouraged Mergen Cena that he could be the best defensive and small forward in the league. Carlton felt that he was the best point guard. Tommy Garrick just really developed a take no prisoners type of attitude. So Kenny Green grew and became one of the best shot blocker rebounders in the country. So it was through their maturity, but also through their desire to be successful. And again, the missing ingredient was the confidence that Tom Penders gave them to be successful. And we were able to put together a game plan that were going to allow them to be a good basketball team.
URI had 5 straight losing seasons when Penders arrived. They turned it around immediately. 20 victories and an NIT invitation last year. Does that Mr. Fix-It label sit well with him?
Well, that's what I've been called in different circles, and I don't really mind the label because I take a great deal of pride in being able to turn a losing program into a winner.
He arrived in Rhode Island just weeks before practice in October of 1986. He knew he had to start at the very beginning.
The first thing I had to do was to try to get my system, which is quite basic, I think. I tried to instill fundamentals in my team. I tried to instill confidence and a style of play that kids usually like to play. But at first, like any new coach, you have adjustments to make to your personnel. A lot of our kids were afraid to do the things that they could do, so I really had to play a little bit of psychology with the ball club and tried to build up their individual confidences and try to get them to feel better about themselves and to take the pressure of winning and losing away from the game for them.
He, like I said, he instills confidence in you. He lets you know that he thinks you can do it, and that helps the player tremendously. And you don't mind trying things on the court and trying different things to your shots and doing defensive drills and on the floor. So he helps you out in many different ways.
They became the Runnin Rams, a Cinderella team of the growing Atlantic 10. The success continues this year, but there are still more hurdles. They will not be easy.
If we continue to play hard and play well and stay healthy, I'm very confident that we are an NCAA tournament team. But those are big ifs. You have to do it on the floor, and you have to stay healthy.
He is a realist, but he's also seen Rick Pitino take nearby Providence first to the NIT, then the next year to the NCAA Final Four. Penders has a handle on perspective.
In this business, you're as good as your last season and your last game. And I'm well aware that although we seem to have turned the corner, that it's a very short trip from the penthouse to another house.
They're in the penthouse right now today with a 22-point halftime lead, the Rhode Island Rams.
Penders was the perfect person at the perfect time for what they had there for that core of players.
I immediately thought that Tom Penders had something special there. Tom Penders' personality was great for the team. He was intense, and yet he was calm. And I think his team played exactly like that. We would send a live truck down to Tom Penders' house and do a live segment on Sports Locker on Sunday nights with him. And he was open to that, and he was very easy talking about the team.
You know, taking over from Coach Malone with little to no offseason, if I remember. What was the transition like for you coming in as the next URI coach? And what for you, when you saw that team, was the biggest change that you wanted to make in regards to maybe the style they play or the offense you run?
Well, I had coached, it was my 16th year as a head college coach when I took the Rhode Island job. You know, I coached at Tufts for 3 years, Columbia for 4 years, and Fordham University for 8 years. So I knew how to build a program at the lowest schools, rated schools in the country, basically, in those days. There weren't 350 schools back then. I think it was more like 220. And, you know, it was a major undertaking because I took the job on October 4th. Practice started on October 15th. And I had never seen any of my Rhode Island players practice or play in a game when I first took over in 86, 87. And after a week of practice, I felt like we have something here. Tommy Garrick was an unheralded kid from Warwick. He was a football star, and a lot of people thought he'd be an NFL safety or defensive back. He was such a great athlete. And Brendan Malone thought that he should play football. When I took over, my first deal was to convince Tommy that, you know, basketball was a sport. And after a week of practice, I actually told him that he had a future in the NBA if he focused on basketball, because he was such a great athlete who was just learning his skill set. And I worked with him on his shot and things like that. But Tommy put the time in. Any player that becomes a great shooter, an offensive force, is a kid that practices on his own. And Tommy Garrick was such a great player.
That process, like, you know, being a star in Rhode Island and then kind of picking your college.
Yeah, it wasn't much of a process, to tell you the truth. Being a star in Rhode Island back in 1984 wasn't really much a big deal outside of Rhode Island, is what I learned. I didn't have many scholarship offers. I dabbled with Brown early on. Mm-hmm. That was a pipe dream. I wasn't smart enough to go to Brown. They were interested in me a little bit early on. I was on my way to Bryant College when it was Bryant College, not Bryant University, and it was a Division II school, because that was the only scholarship offer I had. I didn't really have a lot of other things going on. There were a couple of Division II schools in the, I think it was the Northeast 10 back then, that I was dabbling with. But if I was going to go to a D2 school, I was going to go to one in state and play with guys that I had known throughout high school, because at that point, a lot of the better high school people in Rhode Island went to Bryant College. So I was on my way to do that. And at the last week of recruiting, I guess. There was a weekend tournament. We didn't really have AAU. I didn't play AAU. I played AAU for maybe 20 games in my junior year, going into my senior year. And I played in the tournament at Marvel Gym on Brown's campus. And Brendan Malone had just got hired at URI as the new head coach. He came to the game. He had a scholarship available that was going unused. And the story goes, he saw me dive on the floor for some loose balls a couple of times. And he was like, well, if I have a scholarship to give, I might as well give it to a Rhode Island kid. And he looks to work hard.
Awesome.
That was it. So on my way to Bryant College, was about to commit there. And Brendan Malone offered me a scholarship in probably the last weekend of recruiting. And I immediately said yes, because I thought I was a Division I player. I thought I had the potential. I was really, really grateful to have been given that opportunity, and I had a chip on my shoulder from that day forward.
The way that he can go either hand with the ball. Derek spins and comes up firing. Beautiful stuff. Boeheim wanted the offensive.
But going into that offseason, so after PC, Final Four run, was there any buildup whatsoever? Seeing that it was a senior year, you had two great guards that started to kind of make some noise nationally, but still really not getting the recognition. Was there kind of any more coverage going into their senior year whatsoever?
Well, I always covered it. That was the big thing with me. I always made sure, whichever station that I worked at, that URI got equal coverage. Again, being down here, even though in my high school yearbook, my pet peeve were Ram fans. I was a PC fan in high school. I hate to say that. Yeah. But then again, Steve McDonald, who does play-by-play for URI, is a PC graduate, which people forget about too. So, anyway. But no, there was not a lot of fanfare. It was all focused. Obviously, it went into that summer before Patino ended up joining the Knicks. And then the focus was on Providence College totally, with Gordy Chiesa taking over, and Marty Conlin was going to be one. They still had some good players on that team. I think they had several good players still left at Providence. So they got all the focus. URI never got as much attention usually. And again, that's what I'm pretty sure I'm the only television reporter who even went to the Atlantic 10 championships down in Morgantown that year.
If we had more of a national reputation going into that season, we should have, but we only had one newspaper covering us in the Providence Journal. That was it. We didn't have the Boston Globe or all the Connecticut players that followed UConn. So to convince the media that we were good, we had to go out and play people. I moved our West Virginia game to Madison Square Garden. We played on the road for almost a month straight. We went out to San Diego State, got a guarantee to play out there. We won. We went to Hawaii, where the trip was basically taken care of by other people, and had a chance to play some good teams out there. And the conference started to get a little more respect because Temple was number one.
Talking with Coach Penders for a while, he obviously had mentioned the lack of attention, and even in terms of scheduling, what they would do just to get games, something obviously Penders was great at. And I know you mentioned the Temple team, Coach Cheney, legendary Coach Cheney, he as well for the Atlantic 10, those two teams, I feel like were so foundational to what they were able to bring in terms of the attention. Obviously Temple much so, or much more, I should say, but just being able to play anyone, anywhere, anytime.
And the battles with Rhode Island, going back to your question, is they got, I remember our first game my senior year, we were missing Tim Perry, and that was a game that we won, I think, maybe 12 points, but it was a game. All the games were there. They knew that they have gotten better, and they knew exactly, what we were as a team and how to play against us in a way that the game will be competitive. And if we didn't take care of business, like on the final for the Atlantic 10, we almost, that was a close game. That was a close game. I don't know if they were on top of us at any time in the game, but it was a very close game, and they, it could have went either way, for sure.
When did it start clicking for you guys as a team, knowing, okay, we got something special here?
Honestly, it was probably the first Temple game when we played Temple at home in Keeney. It was a big brawl during the game. And to literally watch the team just come together and everybody have everybody's back. I mean, legitimately, Ramon Rivas knocks out Silk's tooth. Who knows if it was on purpose or if it was an accident. I actually played with Ramon overseas for 5 years. No. And the first thing I asked him when I saw him was, did you do that on purpose? And he just smiled at me. But to watch our whole team literally come to the aid of one of our own players, at that point in time, I think that's when it really clicked that and it had nothing to do with basketball. Honestly, it had nothing to do with basketball. It just had to do with the camaraderie that this team had with each other. We actually knew that we had something special with each other because we were always going to have each other's back.
So I wanted to talk about, you had mentioned, you were really one of the only local TV guys that went up there to cover the Atlantic 10 tournament in Morgantown. Obviously, West Virginia at that time, Rutgers as well, was part of the Atlantic 10 conference. Can't find any film on it. I hope I can one day. But kind of the legend of what Garrick did at that tournament. He was, they lost to Temple in the finals, but he was the most outstanding player. He dropped 32 in the first half against Rutgers, scored 50. 50 points. Can you just talk about kind of that game, what you remember about the tournament, and then the chip on, Garrick's shoulder going into that?
Yeah, the chip on all their shoulders, but especially Garrick, because they had announced before the tournament the all-conference selections, and Tommy was definitely slighted, if not left out. Silk got attention, but everybody knew how important Tommy was. And the entire team rallied, basically, that I remember, around especially Garrick being slighted. And there were other media members they wouldn't talk to they were just basically, no. They would talk to me because I knew them and knew I was on their side for sure. But they basically, it's us against the world mentality down there. And they knew they were going in and they needed to make a decent showing, and they knew it'd be tough to win it with Temple being there, but I've never seen Tommy so focused in my life, the entire team, and the team rallied around him. And I think when he was able to have that phenomenal first half, it took the entire program to another level, because they realized when they rallied, and not that they were a selfish team, but when they played together for a cause almost, that they could take it to another level and they could be one of the top teams in the country. And especially, I think that kicked in, their confidence level went to it. And they were very close in, if I remember correctly, in the championship game.
The one thorn, obviously, kind of in your season, I'm sure there are a few, but obviously you guys were, playing against one of, I would say, probably the best Atlantic 10 teams ever in Temple, what Coach Chaney had there. Obviously, I think for over 30 weeks, they were number one. Could you talk a little bit about that Atlantic 10 championship? You guys obviously were close, a couple free throws away, a couple swings in that game. But how that helped propel you guys and prepare you guys to kind of regroup for that first game in the NCAA tournament, but specifically just kind of what you remember about that Temple team and that game in the Atlantic 10 championship.
At forward for Temple, a 6'7" junior from Morrisville, Pennsylvania, number 32, Mike Breedswick. At forward for Rhode Island, a 6'7" junior from Brooklyn, New York, number 35, Mergen Cena. At forward for Temple, a 6'9" senior from Freehold, New Jersey, number 33, Tim Perry. At center for Rhode Island, a 6'9" junior from Sweetland, Maryland, number 50, Bonzi Colson. At center for Temple, a 6'10" senior from Carolina, Puerto Rico, number 44, Raymond Riva. At guard for Rhode Island, a 6'2" senior from West Warwick, Rhode Island, number 22, Tom Garrick. At guard for Temple, a 6'5" freshman from Saginaw, Michigan, number 12, Mark Macon. For Rhode Island, a 6-foot senior from Brooklyn, New York, number 10, Carlton Owens. And at guard for Temple, a 6'1" senior from Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, number 21, Howard Evans. The coach.
Island getting 78% of their offense this year from the two guards, Garrick and Owens. Laura, I just touched on it very briefly. I don't think there'll be anywhere in the nation tonight that you'll see two better sets of guards matched up. I don't think it's possible to see two better sets of guards on one floor than the two we're going to see here tonight.
Yeah, we had wars against them. They all went down the wire. It was again one way or the other. I mean, obviously they got the best of us by a bucket here and there, but the physicality of the game, the competitiveness of the game, I think, allowed us to grow quickly in that conference. Obviously Temple was a monster, as you mentioned. They were number one in the country, great talent, great coach, and we had some really good games against them. But there were a lot of other teams there that really prepared us as well. 5 or 6 teams in that conference were very good that year, very, very good. So I think that prepared us, obviously, for the tournament to give us an opportunity to possibly maybe win a game or two.
When we lost in the A-10 championship game to Temple by 5 points, by the way, Coach Cheney came in our locker room after the game, and he gave us a little speech about how good we was, to keep your head up. You guys are very, very talented. You could beat most of the teams in the country. And despite losing, we felt good about ourselves. For Coach Cheney to come in the locker room and tell us that, we felt very, very good. He was well respected. They was number one in the country at the time. And from that speech, that kind of motivated us going into the tournament.